Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. Today we're going to be looking at the Disney games on the NES. And by my count, there's 13 of them to cover and review. While there's going to be some good ones in here, there's also some bad ones as well. But because a lot of them are made and published by Capcom, there's definitely hope for the collection yet. Now, the Disney IP, of course, is beloved and far-reaching, so of course it's made its way to video games. In fact, they're still making games based on the IP like these Epic Mickeys here. But there's a great concentration of them on the NES, and that's what we're here to look at today. Do they hold up? Well, let's take a look.
Okay, first up is Adventures in the Magic Kingdom. Welcome to the Magic Kingdom theme park. You explore the park getting Mickey, Goofy, and Donald out of a tough bind by collecting 6 silver keys, which are scattered throughout 5 unique levels, and the last through answering Walt Disney trivia. The levels are rides from Magic Kingdom, and let's look at each one. First is Space Mountain. On this ride, you press the corresponding buttons on the screen within a time window. If you mess up 3 times, you've got to redo it. Overall, this one is easy, a bit too long to keep it fun, but if you don't need to restart it a bunch, you're still going to enjoy it. Next up is Autopia. Here you need to drive your car amongst other drivers that are pushing you as you make your way to the end. The controls are a bit wonky, but once you get it, there's not going to be a ton of challenge here either. Just race your way to the end, avoiding water and other hazards. Once you get to the end and the finish line, you get to collect your next silver key. Next up is Big Thunder Railroad. This is just bad level design through and through. While you can slow down your train to get some foresight as you weave through a giant maze of tracks, it ends up being trial and error until you just memorize the path. It's not difficult, only tedious, and unfortunately not that much fun. Okay, next up is Haunted Mansion. Here's where the difficulty ramps up. This ride is a platformer and you're armed with a candle to take down those pesky ghosts. Towards the end of the level, there's more newbie traps to learn, but once you do, it's a boss fight with a ghost to secure your next silver key. This one, albeit frustrating at times, is actually really fun. Okay, the last ride is Pirates of the Caribbean. This is another side-scrolling platformer where you start out weaponless, trying to rescue hostages and light a fire to signal completion. Once you get the candle weapon, this level gets much easier. Until then, however, you can just jump around, avoiding being hit. Speaking of, 3 hits and you're done. Once you collect the 6th key, you get a cutscene ending, which is pretty lackluster. I'm not sure why the game didn't have a real finale, but it's likely fitting for the overall game. Outside of some nostalgia, getting to explore the Magic Kingdom, and some decent music, this isn't much to write home about. Moving on. Okay, next up on the list is Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. Now, if you watched the video on my NES favorites, you already know my thoughts on this game. It's light, fun, and overall, it's a great action platformer that happens to be a Disney game. It's definitely on the easy side in terms of difficulty, but there's no denying that this game is good. As I mentioned in that video already, you play as Chip and Dale, moving through various levels, some of which you get to pick, and work your way through interesting levels befitting the Rangers. Most of the levels end with a boss that require you to pick up and toss this red ball. You can catch it midair if your timing is right, otherwise it's just going to knock you dizzy for a few moments, making you vulnerable. The enemies are unique, the music is great, and this plays exactly what you'd expect from a 90s Capcom platformer. Okay, next up on the list is Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers 2. With the Sega Genesis and the TurboGrafx 16 having been released in 1989 and the Super Nintendo in 91, most people had moved on from the NES, and so it's no surprise that this sequel, released in 1994, flew well under the radar for most gamers. Since its release is so late in the console's life, this one now fetches some pretty solid coin. As a sequel, it pretty much ups the ante in all aspects. The graphics are improved, there's a lot more story that intertwines with the levels, instead of being seemingly random like the first game, and best of all, the boss fights are unique and they're much harder than the first game, and this is a good thing. I prefer the music and tone of the first game, but that's by no means bad here. Also new is the ability to throw diagonally, which, while helpful, isn't something super easy to get the hang of. Something about the angle never feels quite right, so I tend to stick with the orthogonal directions. The stages themselves are great, and they don't always keep the same formula, like this freezer stage, where it's a race against time to not get frozen. Or you have this haunted warehouse, where you can choose to spend the time in the dark or get enemies to light the way forward. In some levels, Monterey Jack is hiding in a cubby, and if you find him, he'll refill your health, which is sometimes needed with the ramp in difficulty that this sequel brings. Overall, this is an amazing game, and it's a great sequel. While I still prefer the first for its charm and likely my nostalgia that I have for it, the second lives up to the high expectations of Disney fans. Definitely recommend. Okay, next up on the list is Darkwing Duck. Did you ever want a Mega Man game, only instead of playing as the Blue Bomber, you were a Disney character? That's basically Darkwing Duck, and no one's complaining, of course. This is a run and gun that feels very close to some of the other Capcom titles of the area. You play as the superhero Darkwing Duck, as you take down 6 stages and their bosses before the ultimate showdown with Steel Beak, a la the Mega Man formula. In this game though, the stages are bifurcated so that you must defeat the first set of 3 stages before the second set of 3 are unlocked, which tend to be much harder. Another difference is that you can get different types of weapons to help you in your quest to take down the levels, but they act more like power-ups with limited ammunition, and you can only ever have one at a time. Given the target audience, I'm always a bit surprised by the difficulty here. You only have 4 HP, and the invulnerability timeout after being hit is really short. Moreover, some enemies are tedious, like this turtle for instance. It takes so many cycles, and it's not like they drop good stuff either, so it's pretty taxing, especially if you need to do it a few times from dying later in the stage. Lastly, let's talk about these grapple points. While I love the concept, man is it picky. Dying to a missed grapple, especially some of these where you seemingly go through it, are so frustrating to say the least. The bosses are tricky, but not overly unique in terms of the game mechanics. Having power-ups will help bring them down quickly though. Overall, this game is more of the same of what you've come to love from Capcom in the 90s, albeit a bit on the harder side. With some of the other Darkwing Duck games leaving fans stunned with how poor they are, this one stands on a pedestal tall. If you can stick through some of the faults, this is a great game, especially in the Disney collection. Okay, next up is The Little Mermaid. Here's a hot take. This game is much better than one would expect. In fact, I might even call this great, if not for the backwards controls. Let's get that out of the way first. The A button shoots and the B button swims, which is definitely backwards. Worse though, when you're at the water surface, the A button does not shoot. No, instead you jump out of the water, and when you're on land, A then also hops like a fish out of water. Up until the end of the game, I was still messing up these controls, as it's not all that intuitive. Had A and B been flipped, I think it would have worked much better. With that being said, this game is really fun. It plays something in between a shooter and a side-scroller. You make your way through the levels, either dodging or whipping your tail to put enemies in bubbles, which turns them into a projectile later. You can open chests along the way to increase either your tail's power or the range of the bubbles it makes. Either are helpful, but most of the time it wasn't worth the risk to grab them. In fact, I found that just swimming fast and dodging enemies in general was the best strategy. Each level does manage to pull off unique, despite all of them of course being underwater themed. Once you reach the end, you fight a boss. These bosses all follow the same general path. Occasionally a fish appears, bubble fish, throw bubble at boss. Rinse and repeat until dead. It's simple, but it works, much like how Chip 'n Dale's works despite the same formula there too. I wonder if the same team actually worked on these. When you get to Ursula at the end, she's more of the same and not all that hard, but don't celebrate too quickly, she's back and bigger, though not any more difficult. Bubble and toss your way to happily ever after with the prince. I don't play this game very often, in fact I hardly ever do, but it was surprisingly fun. Don't let a princess game throw you. This is another worthy entry into the Disney series on the NES. Next up on the list is DuckTales. Okay, here's the classic that everyone was waiting for, DuckTales. You play as Scrooge McDuck and you pogo your way around 5 levels that are surprisingly non-linear. In fact, some levels will require items from others, pretty atypical for the era of games here. With your cane in hand, you're hunting the 5 treasures, each protected by a boss. Once you get them all, you go up against Dracula Duck. This game is often considered one of the best the system has to offer, and it's easy to understand why. The control of Scrooge is spot on, the level design is great, even if it is a bit of a maze, and all of your favorite DuckTales characters are here, including Launchpad, who does his best to help. In my opinion, the difficulty is perfect for an action platformer of this time, but you can always adjust it up or down when you start too. The music is fitting for the colorful art style, and the entire presentation has earned its place in our childhood hearts. Given how much love this game gets, it's not surprising that this was eventually remastered for the Wii U, PS3, and Xbox 360 over 20 years after it was originally released. It was also released for a time on iOS, but later yanked off, unfortunately. That's okay though, grab this where it makes the most sense, the NES. Okay, next up on our list is DuckTales 2. Not to be outdone, Capcom released a sequel late in the NES lifecycle, and you know what that means. It plays much the same as the first. You still have your cane, though controlled even easier by having to hold down just the B button instead of down and B. But now you'll also be clinging to hooks. Darkwing Duck should absolutely take some serious hints on how a duck should grapple, because here it works perfectly. Like the last one, you have 5 stages which can be selected in any order you choose, though doing some first will let you get upgrades to help reach things like chests and other stages. If you get it wrong, no worries, you can actually go back to an already completed stage now. Upon collecting all these treasures, the 6th stage will become available. The bosses seem a bit easier this time around. In fact, most everything seems a bit easier than its predecessor. It's not a complaint though, each boss is fun and analogous to Chip 'n Dale's 2 where the boss mechanics are much improved. This too here we see some new elements than just jump on them, though there is still some of that still here. I prefer the music of this sequel to that of the original, blasphemous as that may be, but overall it's what a follow-up should be. A more polished version that one-ups on nearly every attribute that came before it. Unless the price of this one comes back to sanity, I'd say you're more than fine to just enjoy the original, but if you get the chance to check it out, do so. This is another great hit in the NES Disney lineup. Okay, cruising right along. The next one up on our list is The Jungle Book. This game, or a variation thereof, came out near simultaneously on the Sega Genesis, the Sega Master System, the Game Gear, the NES, and the Game Boy, for good measure. They should have not spread themselves so thin, because I'm going to struggle to say anything nice with this one. You control Mowgli, if you can call it control. It's slippery physics and delayed action from the input presses. You throw bananas, I think, it's hard to tell, and most enemies take multiple hits, and almost all require you to be crouched to do so. I can't comment on levels 3 through 10 because I can't get to them. The first two are a mess though. There's leaps of faith everywhere and instant death pits scattered around for the worst possible combination. Your goal, though you don't know it unless maybe you read the manual, is to collect 10 purple gems. Doing so could prove difficult with the levels as designed. Take stage 1 for instance. If you can make it to this corner without collecting the other gems, you get stuck since the checkpoint here holds you to the island and it's not possible to get back. The only way forward is to game over and start again. There's no way of knowing you missed them either. There's no indicator, and it's also just trial and error, where error is essentially a soft lock. Oh, and did I mention that there's a time limit for some reason? Since jumping is awkward, the level design is hot garbage, and the fun factor is about a 1, here is 2 nice things that I can actually say. The enemies are at least generous with their health refills, and the theme song plays at the title song. That's about it. It's a sad entry into the Disney collection, and it's a shame too, because we were on such a roll. Okay, next up on our list is Mickey's Mousecapade. While Capcom's name is all over the label for our North American release, it's sadly not developed by them. Instead, this was Hudson Soft, and you can immediately tell that it's not a Capcom game from the minute you start. You control both Mickey and Minnie in an action platformer setting using one control. Minnie lags behind but moves mostly with that input that you use for Mickey. The catch here is that before you can proceed screens, both characters need to be there in order to do so. You can get an upgrade for Minnie that also allows her to shoot, which is helpful, and that you can also use to cheese some of the bosses if you choose to do so, but it would actually be justified. This game is hard, unfairly so in a lot of places. The only way that I could get past this ocean stage, for instance, was to get a lucky health drop. This plays like an early arcade port, even though that it's not one to the best of my knowledge, and that it would be a solid quarter muncher. There's some familiar enemies here, like the cards from Alice in Wonderland, but beyond that, there's more generic ones than anything else. Each stage has a boss fight that feels more like luck than skill to take down, and overall, this game is in the lower rung of Disney games and possibly the library as a whole. It's still a worlds better than Jungle Book, but that's not saying much. I can't recommend this one here, unfortunately, so let's move on to the next one, and quick. Okay, next up, Mickey's Safari in Letterland. It's not all that surprising that an educational game would be released featuring Disney's star Mickey. The goal here is simple: collect the letters of the alphabet for the museum. There are enemies to slow you down, but there's no real danger in that you can't actually perish, which shouldn't shock anyone given the target audience is preschoolers. Like most educational games, there's few elements here that actually constitute a game. The control of Mickey is slippery and the jump physics are floaty, but again, that's okay. It's not trying to be anything beyond its intent. My daughter really enjoyed this one and she's the right age group, so there's some confirmation it's working. Beyond that, there's not much to say here about this one, and we're not done with the educational games yet. Next up is Mickey's Adventure in Numberland. 1 year later, as a follow-up to Safari in Letterland, High Tech Expressions released this similar title, swapping numbers for letters this time around. Dare I say this one is more of a game? No, I won't. Instead of avoiding conflict like in Letterland, you do have a villain at least in Numberland. It's Pete, who is trying to rob us all blind. There's 5 levels, and you will still have to learn by requiring players to find the right number and to solve simple math problems at the end of each stage to progress. After you've done 2 iterations of each level, the 5th one opens, Pete's Hideout. Unlike in Letterland and the simple match after each stage, this one seems a bit more on point, for learning at least, so that there's actually improvements, I suppose. Enough of these educational titles though, let's get back to some actual games. Okay, next up on our list is TaleSpin. This is a delightful shooter based on the television series of the same name. I remember it used to air in the same TV block with DuckTales and other Disney cartoons, so there's definitely some great fond memories of the show. You play as Baloo, who is driving the Sea Duck airplane, driving through various levels of which play mostly horizontal, though there are some vertical sections too. The major mechanic of this shooter that makes it unique is that you can actually flip the plane upside down and go backwards through the level. This helps maneuver tight areas, go back for power-ups, or just help avoiding enemies altogether. After each stage, you can upgrade the Sea Duck by purchasing upgrades like the Rapid Shot for your guns or an engine boost to go faster. To buy these, of course, you need money, which can be collected during the stages as extra pickups. In addition to buying upgrades, you can also buy more continues as well. The game's difficulty is a bit higher than what you might expect, but it's by no means too difficult either. As you play through some of the levels a few times, you get a hang of where to fly and which enemies to expect. At the end of each stage, there's a boss, and they're all unique to mix it up. Some of them take quite a bit of hits to take down, and they're generally fun to do though. While the music isn't bad, it isn't memorable either like some of the others on this list, which is a shame. Being a shooter, there's some sections that have downtime and could have really used some better tracks. If you've not played this before, getting your bearings on how to fly the plane and how to flip it upside down specifically will take you some time to get it together, but it's definitely worth it. It's a light-hearted shooter with colorful stages, fun bosses, and a good upgrade system that puts TaleSpin, thankfully, in the good pile, and it's definitely worthy of its namesake. Okay, the last title on our list, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? This title is of course based on the 1988 movie of the same name that features a combination of animation and live action. Like the movie, you play as private investigator Eddie Valiant as you work your way through the city and eventually Toontown. As you work your way through the city, your objective is to find items by searching for them, either laying on the ground or by digging through drawers, cabinets, and trash cans. Since there's a lot of buildings with lots of doors, you can actually speak with the people to streamline the process, and they let you know if the building is worth your time or not. Notable buildings include the store, which is where you can buy helpful items, though what's for sale is seemingly random and therefore often not helpful. Maroon cartoons, the nightclub where Jessica Rabbit sings, and the Gag Factory from the movie are all here as well, though you can only seem to enter the nightclub, and to do so you'll actually need to find the password. To help you get around town, you can actually find a whistle to call Benny the Taxicab, which is a much better way to travel. Whether you're in a cab or you're hoofing it, watch out for Doom's weasels who can capture Roger. If this happens, you'll have about 8 seconds to select the right punchline to their joke to make them laugh and let Roger go. Fail to do so, and it's going to cost you a life. After you've collected the will, grab some dynamite and the detonator, you can blow up the wall blocking your path to Toontown. Doom's warehouse is here, and after distracting the guard, it's the final showdown with Doom himself. The fight is tedious, long, and arthritis-inducing, since to do any real damage you need to slug him at full strength. This requires you to mash the punch button until your window of opportunity presents itself. While you can tell when he's going to shoot, his punches are less generous, and anytime that you're hit, your punch meter depletes, leaving you to restart the entire sequence. Even if you land some hits, his health bar doesn't seem to move very much. This fight definitely left my hands sore. While I enjoy the tie-ins with the movie, like the characters, locations, and just general theme of the game, it falls a bit short due to the randomness, cheap deaths, and lack of infinite continues. If they polished this one up though, this could have been something really fun, I think. It's received a lot of notorious reputation for being bad, but I think that's a bit undeserving. After all, it's no Jungle Book.
And there you have it. Every Disney game released on the NES, at least in North America. Now, I didn't cover the Little Nemo, the Dream Master, because it's technically not a Disney movie or game, although I did read there might be some involvement between the two. I don't know. Anyways, we kept the list pure, and in the meantime, this is a great collection, right? You have some of the best the system has to offer, like DuckTales, and some duds like The Jungle Book mixed in, unfortunately. Anyways, let me know what your favorite Disney game is down below. And in the meantime, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.